Well, the successful conclusion of the G20 meet in Delhi and the return of the focus of the G20 into key issues of trade, development, climate and inclusion in the truest sense of the word has been big moments for the international community and indeed for Indian foreign policy, which has pushed this through. But what are some of the key takeaways, not just for India, but for the world at large? Because it really does affect, billions outside India as well. Joining us now, a very special guest, the UN Resident Coordinator in India, Shambhi Sharp. Thanks, Mr. Sharp, for being with us. You know, when we use the word inclusion, it implies so much. But to me, perhaps the biggest word on inclusion was the inclusion of the African Union as part of the G20 process. That really broadens the scope of the G20.
Well, thank you very much, Vishnu. Happy to be here. Mujhe yahan bulane ke liye dhanyavad.
Shukriya aap yahan aaye.
It's look, I think we're all excited, basking in the glow of this great success of the G20 declaration, Delhi declaration. I wanted just to quickly step back and sort of speak a little bit about why it's so important. Yeah. We're just now approaching the midterm of the 2030 agenda, so the Sustainable Development Goals. And at this midterm, which the world is coming together actually next week in New York to take stock of how we're doing, a report card, sort of report card process, we're very clearly failing. So you look across the SDGs, only 12% of those targets are more or less on track. And this is our roadmap to peace, prosperity, and inclusion for all. Something like a third of those SDGs have actually either stopped or are being rolled back. We have, a third of the countries in the world right now are either in severe financial crisis or facing that. We have more, I think 730 million people now don't get enough food to eat. Yeah. We have more hunger than we've seen in the last 20 years. Yeah. We have a climate crisis, microplastics in the oceans, in the human womb. Everywhere you look, there are challenges. So this is why, the climate, literally the world is burning at the moment. The SG says it's no longer global warming, it's global boiling.
Yes.
So the G20 summit in India's presidency has come at a critical moment, because this is the opportunity to rejuvenate and accelerate multilateralism and partnerships around these challenges. And I think what we've seen is a great success. Hindsight is perfect. Sure. But I've had the opportunity to speak a lot about India's G20 presidency over the last sort of 9 months or so. And I have consistently said that I'm optimistic that there would be a successful result. Yeah. And the reason is that India is uniquely positioned, and this is now borne out, to bring different countries and communities together across divides. East-West, you saw the political divide because of the Ukraine war, of course. That challenged the Indonesian G20 presidency. Actually, we look back, India played a big role in getting a consensus in the end there. North-South, they really brought the conversation back from politics to development. And inclusion is a big part of that.
Just the fact, talking just briefly about Ukraine, the fact that G20, the focus is back on economic issues, trade issues, climate issues. How important was the success of the G20 this time around, in your opinion, linked to a breakthrough there on the non-inclusion of the word Russia?
Well, again, I think, and this is for the member states of the G20 to decide. This was their conclusion, and what's important is that this gets the G20 back on track to being what it is formally best at doing, which is bringing together financing and economic solutions to development challenges that we have. Right. And even within the Ukraine war component there were important elements that we in the United Nations very much appreciate. There's a clear support for the Secretary General's Black Sea Initiative and the MOU as well. Yes. So we're hoping that can come back on track, because that's been an important means of helping to reduce the impact, the pressures of prices of food and fuel and scarcity, especially for poor countries in the world. So there is a link there as well. But really, this allowed the G20 to focus on things like gender equality. Yeah. There's never been a G20 presidency, a declaration, let's say, that has had more ambitious and strong language on gender equality. Yeah. Women-led development, of course, this was India's kind of contribution to the conversation, moving from sort of developing women to women-led development. Yeah. That's very important. There will be, for the first time now in the next presidency in Brazil, a women-led development working group. So that's an important sort of contribution. A number of different areas, climate.
Sure.
This is very important. Green Development Pact.
But let me ask you about
introduced.
digitalization, because
Yes.
we have this huge digital backbone in India. But besides that, it's also the experience of having used that, which could actually work well wherever it's adopted, should it be adopted. Do you believe that that's a key takeaway as well?
I think absolutely. And this is a perfect example of why India's presidency was, in a way, so authentic. Because it was, India's, again, uniquely positioned, being a lower middle income country. That is just, Chandrayaan-3 landing on the moon, and the fifth largest economy in the world, maybe third by 2030. So India is equally comfortable in that world of the advanced economies, as well as in the global south, the world of development. And
Sure.
India is showing how to bring development solutions at scale. And the digital story is an incredibly important part of that. The GEM Trinity has led to incredible advances in financial inclusion, especially for women, in providing effective public services as well. And this links to India as becoming increasingly a provider of development services and know-how for other countries in the world.
Yeah.
That's one thing I would just add, that we in the United Nations, here in India, now in our 5-year partnership cooperation framework, it's called, have a new strategic dimension, which is because we are throughout the country positioned, we see Indian emerging best practice in development, where increasingly it's sort of a two-way relationship. We're helping to identify and codify and take Indian best practice to the international stage.
Just returning to one of the themes that you spoke about, the Sustainable Development Goals. India is ahead of the curve in terms of meeting our solar commitments. And that's very welcome as we make the energy transition as well. Do you believe that India's model when it comes to solar, and we've got the International Solar Alliance as well, which has been spoken about, is something that can be replicated more effectively in other countries?
I think India is really doing a lot that's very important for other countries to learn from, especially in renewable energy, in solar, in electric vehicles, mobility. One of my favorite games is to spot the blue three-wheelers popping up all over the place, putting in infrastructure for charging stations. So it's very exciting to see here. And this is where you see a great partnership between the government and the private sector, a vibrant private sector putting in hundreds of billions of dollars invested in renewable. Now that's being led by, for example, the government, the Prime Minister's Panchamrit targets at COP26, 500 gigawatts of renewable energy. This is really, it's not going to be easy to achieve, but India is moving rapidly towards that, and I think it's setting an important standard.
One of the biggest problems which so many countries speak about is who's going to pay for climate tech. The solutions are already there. Green hydrogen is going to be a reality in a couple of years. The technology already exists. Do you believe that this G20 has come any closer to helping us find a global solution to who pays?
I think it has, and I think that's another important message that India has brought to the table as an important voice of the Global South, creating space for the Global South to have its voice heard at the top table of the economic and financial discussions. And that is climate justice. So it's about climate action, it's about mitigation and adaptation and climate justice. And this is where India has put very clearly forward the point also that the United Nations is making. The Secretary General has come out with his call to rescue the SDGs with an SDG stimulus. And basically saying, look, we are woefully behind in terms of the financing to help developing countries make that energy transition. And India's presidency, actually there was an expert group, Mr. Singh and Mr. Summers came together. They issued a report that aligns very well with the Secretary General's report.
They'll be back this month as well.
Exactly, and that's basically $500 billion a year that we need in terms of additional official development assistance. But then that helps unlock several $1 trillion a year and bringing in, crowding in the private sector, and being, first loss risk adjusters, so that the private financiers can come in, because otherwise developing countries cannot make that transition fast enough.
Sure. A final question: multilateral development banks. Again, when you're talking about inclusion, it's financial inclusion, which is so very important. Yeah. What does the G20 this time actually say about that? How does it take us forward?
Right. So again, very much aligned. The G20, India's presidency, is very much aligned with what we in the United Nations have been saying. Absolutely. The UN Secretary General is saying, look, we need a Bretton Woods 2.0. So the international financial architecture is one that was designed with good faith,
yes,
and fit for purpose at the end of the Second World War. But the world has moved on tremendously, and the international financial institutions, multilateral development banks, need to reform very quickly. Now, everybody agrees with that. I mean, you talk to the leadership. Of course, now Mr. Banga leading the World Bank, and all of the others agree that we need reform. The question is the scale of the reform and the pace of that reform. And that's where India's presidency has put forward, through this Delhi Declaration, a call for very ambitious reform to unlock, to make a step-level change, not just a little bit on the margins, but we need trillions. Right now, the financing gap for the SDGs is about $4 trillion a year. Now, there is plenty of money in the world. It's definitely there.
Sure.
But we have to unleash, especially private sector financing, and really bring in a quantum leap, let's say, an order of magnitude increase in terms of money made available to developing countries to make the energy transition and make a just energy transition.
Indeed. Well, thanks, Mr. Shah, very much for joining us and just sort of going through some of the key points. It was lost, I think, in the euphoria over Ukraine, but actually, at the end of the day, I think a lot of the key points, certainly SDG goals, financial inclusion, we really do need to look at where G20 takes us in terms of actual progress on the ground. Thank you very much indeed.
Absolutely. And in fact, I've been calling it an SDG 20.
Right,
so,
absolutely.
Thank you very much. Bahut dhanyavad.
Namaskar.